I knew something was wrong the moment the key wouldn't turn. It was a bitter Thursday morning in early February. The sky a washed out grey that mirrored my insides. I had just returned from St. Luke's Medical Center, still in the same hoodie and leggings I'd been wearing for 2 days, still clutching the duffel I'd thrown together when Marcus collapsed. The bouquet in my left hand, daisies and carnations from his team at the architecture firm, had browned in the car. Overnight, my face was puffy from crying, lips dry and split. Marcus had taken his last breath in the ICU 12 hours earlier. I wasn't ready to face the echo of our apartment, but what I found instead knocked the air right out of me. I stepped onto the stoop of the brownstone we shared in Ridgewood and slid my key into the lock. It jammed. I tried again. Nothing. I checked the spare hidden behind the mailbox. Still no luck. I stood there, frozen, realizing with each failed twist that something had shifted. Then I noticed the curtains. The minimalist white linen ones I'd hand-stitched were gone, replaced by burgundy velvet panels that screamed someone else's taste. My stomach clenched. I leaned closer, shielding my eyes from the dull morning glare. Inside, the living room was in chaos, boxes stacked high, furniture moved. A gaudy lace runner lay across the credenza. My meditation cushions were gone. In their place sat a glass ashtray and an empty soda can. And then I saw Linda, Marcus's mother, sitting in my chair, wearing pearls and a smug smile, holding a mug from the set Marcus and I had bought at a flea market in Portland. Across from her was Elise, Marcus's cousin, folding dish towels like it was the most normal thing in the world. I knocked. No response. I knocked again, harder this time, the sound echoing down the street. My hands trembled, my voice caught in my throat. Finally, the door creaked open. Linda stood there like she was expecting me. Her posture was calm, her eyes were sharp. "Claire," she said smoothly, "didn't expect you so soon." What is this?" I asked, my voice cracking. "Why can't I open the door?" She didn't flinch. "Because you don't live here anymore." I blinked. "What?" Her smile stayed, frozen and cruel. "Marcus paid the mortgage. This place is his legacy, and without a marriage license or will, well, it defaults to family." I couldn't speak. "You were just his partner," she said, as if that meant nothing. "You didn't have kids, didn't legally share the property. You were just living here." I took a step back. "We were together for 8 years. I helped pay the bills. I covered his student loans when he got laid off during COVID." Linda raised a hand, cutting me off. "You helped. That doesn't mean you belong here." Behind her, Elise reappeared, holding a stack of our photo albums. She looked at me and shrugged. "You left the basement door unlocked when you rushed out. We figured you wouldn't be back for a while." I stumbled backward, one hand on the railing, the other gripping the wilted bouquet. A laugh slipped out, not from humor, but from the stunned, dizzying disbelief that hits when the ground under your feet gives way. Linda narrowed her eyes. "What's so funny?" I steadied myself, brushing away a tear I wasn't sure was from anger or grief. Exactly 1 year ago, almost to the day, I sat with Marcus on this very stoop, watching him wrestle with the idea of shutting down his freelance design business. We were in debt. His father had just been diagnosed with Parkinson's. We didn't know how we were going to make rent that month. I remember the way Marcus couldn't quite meet my eyes when he said it. "They might come for the house." Claire, he wasn't the kind of man to scare easily. But that day, he looked hollowed out, like someone had reached inside him and scooped out all the certainty. The startup had already drained what we had left. His name was on the utilities, but the lease, that was mine. Still, it was me who picked up a remote gig editing grant proposals just to cover rent when things got tight. Marcus never asked where the renewal notices were sent. He was busy trying to find himself again, grieving the company he'd built and lost. I kept things running, fixed a leaking sink with a YouTube tutorial, walked 4 miles to get the cheapest groceries, painted the hallway that summer in that calming sage green he said made him feel less trapped. Our home survived on my quiet resilience. Linda never knew, she barely visited. She said Charleston was too slow for her taste, too sentimental, she used to say, as if that were an insult. I stood there on the porch, letting the cold February air soak into my hoodie. But I didn't move, I didn't cry. It felt like my body had short-circuited, too stunned to grieve, too frozen to rage. How do you process losing your person and your home in the same breath? Eventually, I drove to a roadside motel near the old outlet mall, the kind with flickering signs and that strange, antiseptic smell of bleach and old dust. I used the emergency credit card Marcus had tucked into the back of his wallet, the only one that hadn't been cancelled yet. 3 nights. That's what I gave myself to figure out what the hell came next. I sat on the edge of the sagging mattress, staring at my bag. I hadn't packed clothes, just a duffel I grabbed the night Marcus collapsed, still half unzipped with a sweatshirt, a notebook, and a charging cable tangled like ivy. I couldn't sleep. I watched the walls until morning. My throat felt like sandpaper. And then I did something I never imagined I'd have the strength for. I picked up the motel phone, fingers trembling, and dialed the number Marcus had written down months earlier. "Good morning," came the voice on the other end. "St. Matthew's Memorial. This is Margaret speaking." "Yes," I said. My voice was steadier than I expected. "This is Claire Bennett. I need to update the guest list for Marcus Donnelly's memorial." That afternoon, I went back to the house. Not through the front. I circled the block and parked 2 streets over, behind the overgrown hedges that bordered our backyard from the neighbor's fence. I waited, watched. No sign of Linda's blue sedan in the driveway. Elise's rust-colored hatchback wasn't there either. Good. I tightened my grip on my duffel and stepped through the back gate. The one Marcus and I installed together one sweaty July afternoon with a borrowed drill and too many curse words. I still had the key. Of course I did. They changed the front lock, but not the back. The side gate creaked just like it always had. Marcus kept meaning to fix the latch from the back porch into the laundry room, but he never got around to it. Typical. I knew the trick to opening it. Without a sound, a little pressure on the top left, then twist. Just like that, I was in. Inside, the house smelled wrong. Not terrible, just alien. Gone was the faint scent of Marcus's cedarwood cologne and the cluttered smell of soldering wires and old paperbacks. The living room had been overtaken by lavender air fresheners and fresh paint, but I wasn't interested in that space. Linda hated the office, said it gave her a migraine. She used to call it the nerve center of Marcus's mess. That's why I knew she wouldn't touch it. I was right. The door creaked open to reveal the same chaos. Labeled USB sticks, sticky notes with equations, legal pads covered in diagrams and half-doodles. It was Marcus's mind, scattered across a small room. I stood in the doorway, absorbing the silence, the familiarity, and then I went to work. Top drawer of the filing cabinet. I knew what I was looking for. Not a prenup, we weren't married, but something, anything. We talked about protecting the house after his business tanked last year. He didn't trust his family with decisions, and I had been the one to cover rent, utilities, even groceries 4 months, while he rebuilt from scratch. A folder labeled Homed Legal slid forward. I opened it slowly, heart pounding. Inside were 4 pages on heavy legal letterhead, dated 2 months ago. My name, his name, a notarized agreement. A highlight on page 2 caught my eye. In the event of the partner's death, all jointly held assets, including the residence at 17 Oakmere Lane, shall default to the Cola C. Claire DeWitt, as outlined in Lease Amendment 4B. My breath caught. His signature was there. The clean, slanted M of Marcus I hadn't seen since the hospital. Below it, in small handwriting, he'd added, "In case things go badly, you should have a place to land." My knees buckled. I sat on the desk chair and let the paper rest in my lap. I read it once, twice, a third time. A tangle of emotion twisted in my chest. Grief, disbelief, relief, even love. Somehow, in the middle of his decline, Marcus had thought of this, thought of me. I tucked the folder into my coat, folding it tight beneath my arm. I didn't want to cry again. The motel room smelled like stale microwave popcorn and off-brand cleaner, but it was quiet. I was halfway through a cup of supermarket instant noodles when my phone buzzed. Angela, my old law school friend, had texted after our meeting. "They don't know who they're dealing with. Let's get to work." I had barely finished reading it when the knock came. 3 sharp raps, not hesitant, assertive, the kind of knock that says, "We know you're in there, and we don't care." I peeled the curtain back an inch. Linda, standing with Elise, Marcus's cousin, in her oversized wool coat and patent leather heels, like she was headed to Sunday brunch instead of barging into someone's grief. I opened the door just enough for her to see me calm, collected, holding a legal folder in one hand and a plastic spoon in the other. "We need to talk about next steps regarding the house," Linda said, cool and clipped. "Next steps," I repeated, as if we were partners negotiating a sale and not adversaries in a betrayal. "Elise and I have retained counsel. Since Marcus left no will, his estate including this house defaults to next of kin. As his mother, I cut her off. Actually," I said, holding up the folder, but not handing it over. "Marcus and I signed an addendum, legally executed, joint tenancy. I'm on the lease. You'll get a copy through formal channels after my attorney files. Linda's face twisted somewhere between disbelief and rage. Elise leaned forward like she might grab the paper from me, but thought better of it. I suggest, I said evenly, you don't come knocking again, unless it's with a delivery notice or an apology. Then I shut the door. Linda's expression faltered, just slightly. You're bluffing, she said, her voice low and sharp. Am I asked, casually stepping backward toward the motel door. Because if I am, you're free to head back to your car and toast to your victory. But if I'm not, then what you've done counts as trespassing, unlawful entry, and tampering with property that's not yours. Elise, standing a few paces behind her with that ever-present smirk, shifted uncomfortably. The man next to her, their lawyer, Mr. Langley, cleared his throat and glanced down at his leather briefcase, as though it might contain an escape route. Linda didn't respond. Instead, she turned abruptly, climbed into the front seat of her car like a queen in retreat. Chin lifted high, Mr. Langley followed, awkward, not making eye contact. They didn't knock again. That night, I sat cross-legged on the edge of the motel bed, the threadbare comforter bunched under me, holding the folder Marcus left behind. His letter was tucked inside, the paper already soft from how often I'd unfolded it. I ran my fingers across his signature. That swooping M, confident even in his worst days. I wondered if he'd seen this coming, if he'd known how quickly his mother would circle like a vulture, how casually she'd try to erase me, like I'd been nothing more than an unfortunate phase in his life. Maybe that's why he wrote the letter. Maybe he'd expected this. Sleep never came. The motel clock flickered. 3:17 a.m. when I finally gave up trying. My limbs felt electric, not with energy, but with adrenaline that buzzed under my skin and refused to leave. My hands wouldn't stay still. My breath came short, controlled, prepared. Around 6 a.m., a delivery slid under the door with a soft whisper of paper on carpet. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. A clean envelope, court seal crisp, the address typed neatly. Cadham County Probate Court. My name was printed in bold on the second page. Claire DeWitt, respondent. My pulse jumped. I read the first line twice before it landed. A formal petition has been filed by Mrs. Linda Harper, mother of the late Marcus Harper, contesting the validity of the tenancy agreement and property transfer filed February 5th. The letter didn't tremble in my hands. I wouldn't let it. But something inside me coiled tighter. She was claiming undue influence, that I manipulated Marcus, that he hadn't been in his right mind when he signed over property protections. She wanted the house. She wanted everything. I picked up the phone and dialed. Angela answered on the first ring. Figured you'd call, she said before I said a word. She's saying I coerced him, I said flatly. That I took advantage of him when he was weak. Angela was quiet for a second. Then, that's a classic move. When people don't have legal ground, they throw everything and hope something sticks. She wants to rewrite who we were, I whispered, like I was nothing, like none of it was real. Angela's voice softened, but stayed steady. Claire, you supported him. You kept him housed, fed, and cared for, while everyone else disappeared. That's not coercion, that's commitment, and we can prove it. I folded the letter, placed it gently back in the envelope, and zipped it into the inside pocket of my suitcase. I wasn't going to be erased. That afternoon, my phone buzzed with a message from a number I hadn't seen in over a year. James Harding, Marcus's old business partner, the one who vanished after the investors pulled out. Hey Claire, I don't want to get involved, but Linda called. She asked about Marcus, whether he'd been confused or forgetful. Wanted to know if I had any emails or anything, really. My stomach clenched. I hadn't heard James's name since the night Marcus's startup crashed. He was always calculating, even when pretending to be loyal. She brought up that investor meeting he missed, remember? Said maybe Marcus wasn't all there near the end, even if it was circumstantial, even if it was wrong. I knew how that kind of thing could spiral. Undue influence was hard to disprove, especially if it came wrapped in whispered concern and plausible doubt. They weren't just coming for the house, they were trying to unmake the truth. That was the moment it clicked. Something Marcus had said in passing, one night after dinner, swirling the last of his tea. I've got an appointment next Thursday, he'd mumbled, not looking up from his laptop. St. Luke's Neurology. Just a check-in. Probably nothing. I hadn't gone with him. He told me not to worry. I didn't even ask what it was about. Now, sitting cross-legged on the motel floor, with files and receipts scattered like fallen leaves around me, I leapt up and scrambled to the bottom of my suitcase. I dug through his briefcase, the one he always kept zipped and organized, and there it was, a manila envelope marked with his name and the date from 3 months before his heart failed. No cognitive impairment, no signs of memory disruption or neurological disorder. I read the neurologist's letter 3 times, then a 4th, just to be sure. Finally, I exhaled the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for a week. Marcus had been fine, lucid, intentional, and now I had proof. Monday morning. 1 week since Marcus died. 5 days since Linda filed the petition. 72 hours since I found the letter that would unravel her entire case. The courthouse on Montgomery Street was freezing, even though it was already February. Marble floors, steel benches, paper echoing in cold corridors. Everything sterile. Everything meant to shrink you. Linda sat across the room, lips pursed, dressed like grief had a dress code. Elise flanked her, smug in silence. And there he was, Mr. Langley, the same man who'd followed her to the motel, a loyal retriever. I didn't look at them. I looked at Angela, my attorney. We sat at the respondent's table, our folders stacked neatly, our hands still. When the judge entered, a woman in her 60s with round glasses and weary eyes, she called the hearing to order. Her voice was firm, neutral, already tired. Langley went first. He spoke softly, deliberately, in that courtroom concerned tone. Linda wasn't vindictive, just heartbroken, just worried. He said Marcus had been under strain in his final months, that his decisions may not reflect sound mind or stable emotional footing, that unfamiliar influences had isolated him from his family. He never used my name, just hovered around me with euphemisms. Angela didn't interrupt. She let him finish. Then, when the judge turned toward us, she simply stood and handed over the neurologist's letter from St. Luke's. "One document, Your Honor," she said, clear and measured, signed and dated by Marcus Harper's attending neurologist, 3 months prior to his death. Confirms full cognitive function. The room stilled. Langley blinked, taken off guard. "Even so," he said, scrambling, "we must still consider the emotional environment, the interpersonal dynamics. Do you have documentation?" The judge asked, voice flat. "Any medical testimony? Written observations from a licensed professional?" He hesitated, shuffled his papers. "No, Your Honor." That was it. He had nothing. No evidence. No leverage. No story left to spin. Outside, the air had warmed slightly, but the wind still snapped like tension in my chest. The oak trees lining the sidewalk moved gently, as if the courthouse had never held the last breath of our story. I didn't expect her to follow me, but she did. Linda's heels clicked against the stone steps, like gunshots. Her coat flared behind her like a cape of grief and pride. She caught up to me halfway down. "You think this is over?" she asked, voice hushed but sharp. "You think a piece of paper makes you family?" I didn't stop walking. "No," I said, "but Marcus did, and that's what matters." "You might have won the apartment," Linda said, voice sharp as glass, "but you'll never erase me. I'm his mother." I turned, slow and deliberate. "You already erased yourself," I said. She blinked. "What? You erased yourself the moment you tried to rewrite who Marcus was, the moment you broke in, threw out his things, and stood in court lying about the man you barely understood." Mr. Langley took a cautious step forward. "Miss Vance, please, we're done here. If you don't leave now, the officers will escort you." Her mouth twisted. "You vindictive little—" "No," I interrupted, "not vindictive, just finally free." And I walked away, spine straight, heart thudding, never once looking back. The chapel smelled like lilac and lemon oil. It was Tuesday, exactly 1 week since Marcus's heart gave out. The service was set for noon, but by 11:15, the pews were full. Friends, colleagues, a couple of Marcus's old clients had flown in from Phoenix and Baltimore. Some carried worn notebooks, others wiped their eyes in silence. His urn sat on a velvet-draped table, deep blue, his favorite. I'd picked the color myself. Then I saw them, two silhouettes, slipping into the back pew like shadows, dressed in coordinated black, veils, pearls, shoes too loud for mourning. Linda and Elise. They weren't on the guest list. I'd made sure of that. Karma. The funeral home promised they would be turned away at the door. Clearly someone got distracted. I turned. The music stopped. Even the minister paused, sensing something real in motion. When I reached the back, Linda met my eyes. Her smile was thin. Elise looked away. "You're not supposed to be here," I said, soft but firm. "We're not leaving," Linda said, voice low and rehearsed. "I gave birth to him. Then you should have respected his choices. I'm his mother, and I was the only one he chose." She straightened, defiant. "You can't stop me." But Elise stood up first. "We're not wanted here," she murmured. "Let's not pretend we are." Linda stared at her, stunned, but slowly, she followed. There was no outburst, no drama, just the quiet clack of heels and the soft click of the chapel door. When I turned back toward the altar, the room exhaled. The minister gave a slight nod. With hands steady, I walked to the front and stood beside the urn. I didn't speak long, I didn't cry, but I didn't look away. Outside the chapel's window, the garden was bare winter soil turned, waiting for whatever came next. Back at the apartment, the air was still. I turned toward the small dining table, half expecting to see Marcus in his worn hoodie, legs kicked up, often humming in the background. But the chair was empty. The mug was his. The silence was mine. I had survived the court, the funeral, but I still hadn't stopped bracing for the next ambush. So when I glanced out the front window and saw Linda's car idling, her elbow on the door, cigarette between fingers, I didn't move. We made eye contact. She flicked the cigarette away. The car's engine growled, and then she was gone. No last threats, no slamming doors, no final word, just gone. But I knew it wasn't surrender, it was retreat. Linda's way of saying, I still exist. I went back inside, turned the deadbolt, and let the silence settle. That night, I didn't sleep. Not from fear, at least not anymore, but from something slower, heavier, like my body still hadn't gotten the message that the danger had passed. Marcus once marked a spot in the yard, not with words, just a rough X scratched into the garden bed. A note pinned on the fridge in his handwriting had said, "For when you're ready." I wasn't ready, but the next morning, I went outside anyway. I dug where he marked, no gloves, just bare hands in cold February soil. I turned the earth, added fertilizer, planted every seed. I watered them gently. Then I sat beside the bed as the sun dipped behind the neighbor's roof. And for a little while, I forgot about the lawyers, the petitions, the seating chart at the memorial. I remembered his hands, his laugh, the way his gardening had never fit right. When I came back to the front door that evening, there was an envelope tucked beneath the mat. No stamp, no handwriting, just 6 words printed in bold, machine-style font. You don't belong in that house. I held it for a moment, feeling nothing. Then I tore it in half, dropped it in the compost, and dusted my palms with dirt. I whispered, "You don't get to haunt me." Then I went inside and made cinnamon tea because Marcus used to say, grief needed something sweet. Spring came early that year. The air outside smelled like lemon blossoms and turned soil. The garden, once just a patch of scribbled dreams in Marcus's old sketchbook, had started to stir. Shoots pushed through the soil like they'd never doubted they could. The house changed with the season too. I painted the guest room a soft sage green, took down the photos Linda had hung, and replaced them with my own, Marcus and me by the lake, our old dog Jasper in his raincoat, a blurry sunset we'd chased one Sunday. Instead of arguing, I cleaned out the home office's office, but left one drawer untouched, not as a shrine, as a promise. Some nights, I'd sit by the kitchen window and talk to him, out loud, about the mint coming in strong, about the rosemary that wouldn't quit, about how everything in this garden seemed to have a little of his stubbornness, and somehow, a little of mine too. One Saturday, as I trimmed back the basil near the windowsill, I saw a plain envelope in the mail. No threats this time, just a check, a refund from the funeral home. Inside, a card that read, "You handled everything with grace." No name, no return address. But I knew the handwriting. It was Elise's. The wind moved the curtains. The chimes on the porch sang their crook song, and somewhere in the hush, I could almost hear Marcus laugh. They always say grief fades with time. It doesn't. It changes. It stretches. It softens at the edges, maybe, but it never disappears. It just folds into your routine, into the tea you make, into the silence between your Spotify songs, into the moment your hand still reaches out for someone who isn't there. Marcus is gone, but the marigolds, the rosemary, the lavender, they keep growing. I added a bench by the back fence under the maple tree. Marcus once said needed wine chimes. I sit there sometimes, not to cry, to remember who I've become. Because it turns out, the sweetest revenge isn't a court ruling. It's the quiet click of the lock from inside. It's making coffee barefoot in your kitchen with no one watching the clock. It's walking through your house and not bracing for correction. It's peace that doesn't need permission. I don't tell people everything that happened, not because I'm ashamed, but because healing doesn't need an audience. I changed the locks. I kept the garden. I walk differently now. I take up space. I don't flinch when I pass the stretch of road where Linda once parked her car 4 hours, just waiting, because she's not waiting anymore. She lost, and I'm not angry. I'm just done. This house is mine. This life is mine. This quiet, steady voice, that's mine too.